Good morning. We're here at the Fairhope Public Library to interview Jim Wegman, who is a veteran from the United States Air Force, and we're just delighted to be here. This is a pleasure and a privilege to record a conversation. It's just a get-to-know situation, Jim, and I'm just privileged to be a part of this. So let's just get started. Kind of tell us what your current status is and what you do each day in general, before we go back to where we started with military services.
I'm currently retired.
Oh, okay.
No, very retired. And, I've been in Fairhope now for 12 years almost. And I dearly love my little sailboat. And I dearly love to go fishing in my little kayak. And I still love my little motorcycles. And my friend and I travel quite a bit. We worldwide, and we like out west Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. We like to go to the antiquity sites there. A couple trips a year doing that, and I don't know, my time is occupied.
Now, what brought you to Fairhope? How did you get interested in Fairhope?
My sailboat.
Okay.
I was, after retiring from Eastern Airlines, I looked around for a nice place. I wanted to go sailing. I'd chartered with the airlines. We went down to the Caribbean quite often. We could charter in the Virgin Islands, Tortola, and because I was based in Atlanta. But after retirement, I wanted to get a sailboat and do some serious cruising, and which is what I did. I bought a little 33-foot CSY, and sailed it around here quite a bit, and sailed it down to Mexico, and that occupied me for 5 or 6 years.
So as well as a pilot, you're an accomplished sailor then, to a degree.
If you want to say that.
Yeah, yeah. You feel comfortable in the open sea? Fairly comfortable, I'll say.
Yes, yes. I hedge that because you're never comfortable in the open sea. It's always.
I guess it's dangerous if you do become comfortable.
I don't call it dangerous, but it's kind of anxiety producing out there all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've retired to Fairhope and doing things here that you enjoy. Let's go back a little ways, and from your record here, I see that you were born in 1942, which would make you about 70 years old almost.
That's right.
We'll be celebrating the 70th birthday before too long. And you're a native of Pemberville, Ohio. And how long were you raised there? And what was your...
Born and raised there. It's a semi-rural area near Toledo. And I was the youngest of 6. And I went to school at Bowling Green, got my degree in industrial engineering at Bowling Green University, and then left. And I still go back and visit a couple of times a year. But
You still have family back there?
I have one brother yet, that's all, and nephews and nieces, and extended family, right.
Yeah. Did you work out of college, or did you go straight into the military?
I worked. That was the era of the draft, as you know, and so I took the exams for naval and Air Force pilot training in my senior year in college, and passed them both, accepted for flight training, but didn't have to commit. And then after graduation, I got a job with Bendix Corporation in Teterboro, New Jersey. They got a deferment because we were working on the Bendix missile for the Army at that time. So I took the job, and but for 6 months I found myself in this big warehouse office with 50 desks, and it wasn't my thing at all. So I called my recruiter and said, sign me up.
So your test scores were still valid at that point in time, and
They
you
were.
qualified for training.
Yes, I had a window,
But then you got a deferment from the draft because you were employed, or were you still eligible for the draft?
now, as long as I was working at Teterboro on this Pershing missile,
Okay.
I considered it an essential project. And
So you had a classification that kept you from being drafted.
at that time.
Yes.
uh,
So you became, would we say, a little bored with the civilian sector and what you were doing at that point in time.
Quite bored.
Yeah. So you elected to enter the military, and you were drafted by the Air Force.
Right. If I hadn't joined,
Right.
enlisted in the Air Force, why, of course, we'd be drafted
Well, I
into
mean,
the
you
Army.
joined the Air Force, right?
Right.
And tell us a little bit about your training in the Air Force. Where did you go, and what did that consist of?
Initial training was at Lackland Officer Training School, Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. It's a 3-month, of course, condensed course. You come out as a second lieutenant. There was a washout rate that nobody told me about that, that when I joined, but it wasn't that difficult. It was fast and furious, but and after 3 months, you come out with a second lieutenant's commission and went straight here to Selma, Alabama, to Craig Air Force Base at the time for pilot training.
I see. So you did not have any ROTC or anything, any kind of military exposure in college
No.
at all. But did you have family that were military? Did you have a family background of military?
My brother served, he was drafted in the Army, served in Germany, my oldest brother. And of course, I had 3 brothers, both others were draft eligible, so they went in the reserves, one in Navy and one in Air Force.
Now, take us back in time. About this time in your life, what was going on in the military as far as, weren't we beginning the Vietnam era and the crisis there in the very initial stages?
Heavy. Of course, when was the 68 where the convention in Chicago, I think it was so. But yeah, in 65, I do remember, because I graduated from college in 65, and I know, everybody around me was being drafted, and everybody that didn't go to Canada.
Sure.
I didn't know anybody at the time personally that did that, actually, but that was the era. And but yeah, it was heating up. That was the Johnson era when he used 200,000 troops or something during that period.
So what would you say, and you might take a moment to think about this, what would you say motivated you to enter into a military obligation at that point in time?
Quite honestly, well, you're going to be drafted, but I didn't want to avoid the draft, honestly, but they were going to teach me to fly airplanes. This was an awesome thing for a kid, from northern Ohio, and they did. Yeah.
So you had an interest in flying.
You bet.
That motivated you to get in the military, which was the quickest way.
Well, you're going to be in the military anyway. You might as well do something you like.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit outside the military experience. I know after your military, you found employment with a commercial airline, and tell us a little bit how that happened. What was the process there?
That was I got out in July of 1972 out of the military. At that time, airlines, they paid very well. It was a much different job than it is now. It was, let's see, how can I explain that? It was, my time was up. I had 7 years in the military. My time was up. So, and I knew I didn't want to go back to a warehouse desk job in New Jersey, which would have been available. So everybody, it was a little bit difficult to get hired at the time. There was a 1,500-hour minimum heavy jet engine time, but I did have that, of course, flying B-52s. So we would all go down to update our portfolios, our applications with the airlines, most of us military guys. We knew the process. And it was within 2 weeks after I got out of the military, I went to Miami and updated with Pan Am, National, and Eastern. And they all had no indications that they were hiring. So I was in a cab going back to the airport to catch my flight home, and a call came over the cab radio that asked if this guy had a Mr. Wegman on board, and they asked me to come back. Evidently, while one of the managers was out to lunch, and while my application was on the desk, he looked at it, liked it, and so that began my career. I was down in training within a week after that.
So they tracked you down, found your application, and tracked you down in a cab on the way back home.
Yeah.
Wow. So you stayed with this airline
20 years.
20 years after you found this job. So it was a career for you,
Oh, yeah.
and you retired from that airline ultimately.
Not by choice, really. They went bankrupt,
Yeah,
back in
Eastern
91.
Airlines was the name of the,
Right.
So flew big planes. Tell us what you flew and how that experience was.
You'd start out in engineer on the 727 on reserve. Still a good job, except walking around doing pre-flights in the snow and slush in New York and Boston.
Yeah.
But I loved the job, and then moved up to co-pilot on the Electra, the Lockheed Electra. Flew the shuttle in New York for a year or so. I guess transitioned from there to co-pilot on the A3 757.
I see.
And no, went to engineer on an A300 wide-body aircraft and 757. Then got checked out as captain in DC-9s until they folded.
DC-9s was kind of the workhorse of the airline industry for a long time. And you stayed domestic. You didn't fly international, or did you stay on domestic
No, I like
routes?
to fly international too. We'd go to the islands, St. Thomas, St. Croix regularly, or one of my favorites is layover in San Antonio and go down to San Jose in Costa Rica, and did a lot of Mexico City, Acapulco flying are some of my favorites.
A lot of international exposure for different areas of the country and the world, so it was great. Yeah.
Yes, I enjoyed that part of the job.
Do you still fly at all for pleasure? You still have your license, your pilot's
No,
license?
don't keep it current.
Don't keep it
No,
current.
and don't really have an interest in it anymore.
I see.
I keep up to date with it, but I don't have an interest in it.
I see.
One more time, I see that B-52 over in Mobile, I'd like to.
Well, you mentioned that. Let's go back now and take us from your training and after you got your pilot's training, what was the next step for you?
We went to Castle Air Force Base in California to transition into heavy bombers.
Did you have an option? Did you make that selection yourself to go into heavy bombers?
You made choices. You put down a list, and then whatever. And it wasn't my first choice. I think everybody at that time wanted to fly F-111s or F-4Cs or something, And but there were no vacancies there. But it was good. I enjoyed it. It was.
So you were assigned initially to the B-52 aircraft. Can you describe that aircraft for us? What was it like to fly, and how did it compare to others?
Yeah, of course, it's a huge. Compared, the biggest thing I'd flown until then was a T-33, which was a Korean War era fighter. It was the F-80 Shooting Star, they called it in Korea. The B-52 is a 488,000-pound airplane, and probably split 1/3 is gross weight is airframe, fuel, and bomb load, roughly. I mean, it's an awesome airplane with 8 throttles and 8 engines.
8 engines.
Uh-huh.
Very powerful airplane, I assume.
Yes, it was, especially the later models. They put fan engines on the later models, and it was an awesome airplane. And very refuelable. We could, and we'd practice. Actually, we were trained in air refueling at Castle, but then after I was assigned to Blytheville later, it became a routine procedure. Every flight, you'd do an air refueling. And it flew amazingly well for as large as it is. It had unusual features. It had spoilers for control, so when you turned, a a spoiler would come out on one wing, and that wing would drop, right, you know, you think of it, and it had offset landing gear, so most airplanes, you land on the runway on this airplane, you would twist the gear off, it would cant off sideways, and you would land in a crosswind, you would land angle. It was a very strange thing to get used to at first, but it was hardy. I mean, I banged that airplane around in weather and
real durable and kind of a workhorse, we'd say, call it. I see.
Yeah, it was very reliable.
Did you go in initially as a pilot for the B-52, or did you get on the crew and move through the seats, so to speak? Or how did that work in that day?
Yeah, you get trained as a co-pilot at Castle in California. That takes about 3 to 4 months. And then I came first duty. Well, then you had to go to a nuclear weapons school in Houston, a month or so. I don't remember a thing about it. Something about tritium gas canisters.
Yeah.
And dial a yield. And I know that bombs at that time, you could dial the yield on them from the cockpit. And but then, and from there, we went directly to the duty station. Or my first duty station was up here at Blytheville, Arkansas. And I was assigned to a crew that Major Birch, my first aircraft commander, still is a second lieutenant.
Wow.
But I transitioned. I made first lieutenant within months, a month or so, and there we would the routine at Blytheville was to stand alert in the. They had the bunkers out by the runway. This is Cold War era, as you know. We would have probably at least 6 crews, 4 to 6 crews at all times would be out in the bunker ready to get airborne in 15 minutes notice. The time was usually spent going, you know, we had these go code manuals you had to be pretty familiar with, because you had different, they call it DEFCON positions, 1 through 5. I think the one time we were in the cockpits without engines running. If I remember right, DEFCON 4 was airborne. DEFCON 5 was you're going to war. Of course, you know, when the klaxon went off, you never really knew what it was.
Sure.
Most of the time, the klaxon would go off at least one alert session, and run to the airplane, start the engines, call in to get the go code, and they would tell you to shut down. One or 2 times we'd take it airborne, but in a non-hostile situation. It was not a DEFCON. It was just a training. But one of the, at that time, there were airplanes stayed airborne 24 hours a day with nuclear weapons. I guess a lot of people don't realize that. That was in '66, I guess. And nationwide, we would have 2 or 3 airplanes. You know, they didn't want to get, in case the Soviets attacked, they didn't want to have all the airplanes destroyed on the ground. So they called it Chrome Dome. And we would go, I never flew one of those as aircraft commander, but I flew 3 or 4 as co-pilot. We would have 3 pilots. You'd have the aircraft commander and 2 co-pilots. And we would take off out of Blytheville, go up in northern Canada, go up and, well, first we'd hit a tanker, take on full tanks, 80,000 pounds of fuel or so, and go up over Canada inside the Arctic Circle. I think we were nudging the Soviet radars up there, you know, just testing the system. And we'd turn around, come back, hit another tanker, go circle around up there for another 4 hours. These things would last 24 to 36 hours. And,
the flights themselves would be that long. And you rotate crew during that flying time, I'm
you
sure.
always had 2 people, and one pilot in the bunk. And I remember distinctly one mission where the AC is in the bunk, and I'm in the left seat, the flying captain, and there's a second lieutenant over in the right seat who knows even less than I do, and we're up here with 4 nuclear. It was okay. We knew what we were doing.
Sure.
But I do reflect on that. And for
just how potent you could have been.
a 20-something year old to be flying around up there with 4 nuclear weapons. And
and you would arm those weapons. Should you have been given the order to arm them, you could literally arm them from the pilot seat, and the pilot had that much control over the weaponry of the plane.
It was a two-man concept. We had a radar navigator who, in the old days, was called a bombardier.
Yeah.
And he was actually, so it was, I had to get, well, at that time I was co-pilot later when I got checked out as aircraft commander. Myself and my radar navigator, we each had a big combination lock. We had a box, and we each had a combination. It would take the okay from both of us, and we both had to authenticate. I mean, for example, they would broadcast this complex message, and we had some kind of stencils we'd overlay over it, and if it all checked out, and we both had to authenticate. And if it authenticated, we would go to the box, unlock the box, take out our charts. We didn't know our targets were until we opened the box, and we would. And it would have worked, I believe. I don't think we would have. As I try to review it, at that time, most of the post-strike was in Pakistan, Peshawar. It was all, this isn't classified anymore, it was
Sure.
at the time. But the fuel, when you go back and read, the fuel was so limited. We would have gotten on the target, but I don't believe, I think very few would have made it to Pakistan for post-strike.
So when you left, those were the routine missions that you had at the time of being in Blytheville, more on standby, so to speak. And then once you left Blytheville, where did you go from there? Did you
Got orders to Southeast Asia.
Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of out of the blue. I expected to go over in B-52 as they were flying arc light missions, but they did. That is when it was heating up. Now in '67. And I got orders to helicopters, which does, often, you know, it makes me a little unique because I got to see the war from treetop level and also from 35,000 feet.
Well, how did you get trained on helicopters? Did you fly helicopters?
Never before, no. And actually was kind of disappointed in the order, but as we checked in, we went to Shepherd Air Force Base for initial training in Huey's, and the guy said, you know, I know most of you are disappointed, but you're going to learn to like this. And he was right. It was fun flying down there low and slow and being able to land everywhere, and versatile machine.
So while you were in Southeast Asia, you were piloting a helicopter rather than a bomber.
But we went, it took nearly a year to get transitioned, because I was assigned to the rescue squadron. So first, I think the first step was go to survival school in Fairchild in Washington, Southeast Asia Survival School. They would gave us a week of ground school, told you how to resist interrogation and so forth, and some other survival. And then they would lock you in this simulated prison camp for a week, 5 days, I think. The whole idea is to stress you, you know, to keep you awake all the time and not feed you.
Sleep deprivation and other methods.
Exactly. Yeah, they lock you in a box for a little while, but everybody, you know, knew you were going to get out of it, and then after 5 days, they let you escape, so-called escape from the POW camp, and then you had to make your way across country to well, they gave you a pemmican bar, I think, to eat. You're still, you know, you had pretty much fend for yourself out there, and you would. You had you'd set rabbit snares or squirrel snares, and then you got to a safe house, and they gave you a bowl of soup there, I remember. Then you had to go for another day or so, and if you got caught, you'd probably travel at night, because if you got caught, you had a card, and if they punched your card 3 times, you had to do it again.
Oh my goodness! What were the numbers of people going through the training at that point in time? Were there a good many?
I think that whole school would last to let's see, week on the ground. I think that school had lasted a month. And there were probably 50 of us processed through there at a time. I mean, starting every week, so.
They were cycling people through pretty fast.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, how did you feel about that? Were you a little bit scared after having had that training? How did you feel about your assignment to Southeast Asia at that point in time?
No, not really. It felt like it was good training. They did give you, give you confidence, if anything.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
You know, how to resist, and how, you know, good training and the tools that you were given in the survival packs that you had. Because if you had to jump out of an airplane, you had some survival gear with you.
Yeah. So you were in a rescue mission in the Huey equipment in Southeast Asia.
No, the Huey was just training.
Okay.
H1, it was just training. That was survival school, and then I went to training. The H3 and H53 are very similar. They're both Sikorsky. The H53 is larger, but they're similar enough you can be cross-checked in both of them and fly both of them at the same time. So then we went to rescue training over here at Eglin Air Force Base, and you did water rescue and jungle rescue and drop people down on the penetrator and so forth, and there you had a full crew. See, that H-53 had a crew of 6. You had a pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and 3 gunners. Actually, you had 2 gunners and a hoist operator but he subbed as a gunner when he needed him. And so we went through a full course, which took probably 3 months there, and training on the H-53. And went to Sikorsky factory in Connecticut to learn some details on the helicopter, and then went to Southeast Asia.
Where was your post in Southeast Asia?
That was at Udorn, the first one in helicopters. It's in northern Thailand, and just south of the border with Laos. I mean, I think you probably know that there was as much war, the air war was really going on in Laos down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was the interdiction of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, interdicting the supplies. So our job was to, we would fly across into Laos. There was a place called Lima 98. We called it Long Chang, an airfield up there. General Vang Pao had he was the Royal Laotian Army, had all of his troops there. It was a CIA base. It was one of these semi-secret things that's known about now. We would go, they would call it sheep dipping us. You'd take off your insignia, you know, and take all the insignia off of the helicopters. And so you had some deniability if you were shot down. But we would get our briefings from these civil service CIA guys up there on where the guns were and the weather and so forth. And our job, it was just south of the Plain of Jars where the Pathet Lao, the communist forces were. And so we would pretty much wait on the ground with a portable radio and wait for somebody to get shot down over the trail. And then we would leap off and go pick them up, hopefully.
What kind of equipment did you use? Radio primarily to find these people, or how did they make themselves known in that combat environment?
Everybody carried at least 2. We called them EPIRBs, EPI, emergency something.
Acronyms,
Yeah.
Army and Air Force and all of the militaries,
Right.
famous for acronyms.
Yeah, and everybody carried at least 2 of them, and it would, if you pulled a cord on it, it would set out a beep, 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 and you could locate using ADF. If you tuned in on that frequency, it was a guard frequency. Your instruments in the airplane would point to it, and so you could, and if you went different, you could pinpoint where the person was. And they also everybody had smoke grenades. So once you got into general location, you would have them pop a smoke grenade to locate them. And that was a judgment call, because very often, you know, there would be enemy troops around or something, so you didn't want to locate them too early, or sometimes you didn't want to have them located at all. Sometimes you wanted to have them get out of the area. And you could also talk on the radio. The guy could talk us in verbally once we got in the area. And they varied. The missions some were, you know, uneventful, if the hostile areas and not a shot was fired. Others you think would be so easy, and they became, the one that I got one of those DFCs for was up in, they called it the barrel roll area of Laos, and we were called in. They had these other helicopters. They were called, I can't remember their call sign anymore, but they were infiltrating Laotian troops into a Pathet-Lao communist area. And made along, both their helicopters got shot down together with about another 6 American pilots, 3 on each helicopter, and about 60 indigenous troops. And so we got called in to pull these guys out. And we thought it was a safe area, relatively, because they shouldn't have been dropping these people into a hostile area. I mean,
Sure.
they're supposed to move into the hostile area. And but so anyway, and then when we got there, it's gone. We had a low bird and a high bird. We called it. I was on the high bird at the time. The low bird goes in first, and if you have to go in for a rescue, and the high bird is in that cover and relays, you know.
Both same kind of aircraft?
Right.
Okay.
So the low one went in, and while he is going down, why they set one of those. We found that they started mortaring these people on the ground, and they got one of the other helicopters on fire, but he managed to go in and the plan was to take half of the indigenous troops out, and then we would come out with the other half. And but they all climbed on his. All but 6. We missed, lost track of 6 of them. But anyway, he called, and while you're doing this, we have A1E Sandys that are circling. They're the old. Actually, it's an old World War II and Korean War. Actually, Korean War airplane, low and slow, carries a lot of ordnance. They do a daisy chain around us, dropping ordnance and
just to clear out the zone.
To clear out.
And you generally drop into a clearing if you can find one.
It was all clear there. I mean, there were bomb craters everywhere, but we're out on a plane of jars. It is a plane.
Okay.
And so it wasn't. It wasn't hard. We landed. Often you're hovering over the jungle canopy, though. But in this case,
it was open.
Right.
Completely open.
He landed, and all these guys got on board. And he actually, one of his people was shot through the back, but he survived, one of the pilots, and one of the pilots who was rescued. And we thought, well, they got them all. And time went by, and the next thing you heard on the EPIRB is there's 3 round eyes down. These guys are screaming. There are 3 Americans down there yet.
They call them round eyes. It's what,
yeah, versus I know it's and slain. And so then we had to go, and by this time they knew we were coming, and I still have a copy of the voice on tape at home. It's still kind of chilling to listen
ooh,
to.
I suspected it.
And but we did go in on time. We all landed because these guys were sitting. They told us they were in a bomb crater next to the burning helicopter. So we came in. I went right over this burning helicopter and got it on the ground. I landed pretty hard. And couldn't, well, they clambered on board. One of the guys, one of the A1Es landed through a 500-pounder too close. You know, concussion rocked us up sideways. We had, we call it Willie Pete, holes burned in the side of the helicopter. But I think he was trying to help us. So, and But we got the guys on board, and I'm ready to go. And one of our pararescue guys is out there shooting, hosing with an M16. I can't get him back on board.
So you have a pararescue team on board with you. They leave the aircraft together, the people that are coming in. How many personnel do that? What's the number of pararescue people?
3 normally. But these guys, I mean, it's the Air Force's version of Navy SEALs or something. They get all the special training. And they're so enthusiastic. I mean, more than once when we had a hard mission, you'd find one of these pararescue guys, he'd show up with an M16 and a canister of ammo. He wanted to go along. And you would take them because, I mean, an extra gun out the window is...
Absolutely. But they're not assigned to every mission then?
Yeah, there are 3 assigned to every mission.
Okay.
Only 3.
But sometimes there'll be more.
And sometimes the guys just show up
Want to go. Yeah.
And they loved the stuff. They were good. Which can bring me to another story. It was at NACOM Phnom on a temporary duty, still in rescue. And we would stand alert out at the runway there. We had an alert shack. And at the crack of dawn one morning, there was this terrific explosion. I was in the bunk, and the chandeliers fell off of the ceilings, and ran outside, and one of the A1Es, he was taken off on a first flight and mission, and I found later they had dual magnetos, and he had a problem with one. It was one of these things. He decided to go, decided he couldn't make it, decided to go, and ended up trying to go and couldn't get off the ground. He was fully loaded, and he ended up sheared the gear off and ran into it, and one of his 500-pounders detonated.
Ooh.
And that was the blast. Well, by the time there was concertina wire all around the runway, so we're on the other side. And another guy, he's on fire. He bursts into flame almost instantly. But there were 2 of these pararescue guys out there, and they're in their sweatsuits, and they're going to go jogging. They're physical fitness freaks also, of course. And so they see this happen, and they run over there and run out, and the plane is on fire. This is avgas, too. It's not jet fuel. Avgas burns a lot hotter and faster than jet fuel.
Oh, is that? Okay.
And so they run up on the wing, and I can see them trying to, I don't think they knew how to do the quick disconnects on the harness because they couldn't get him out. And one of them ran back and got a knife somewhere, and they're sawing away, and they pull this guy out over, and they run up, and he's hanging upside down on the side of the fuselage. He's still got a strap, so they run back up there. They saw away on another strap, and they got this guy out of there. I mean, within minutes. And all this time, he carried 20-millimeter cannons as well as bombs, and the 20-millimeter is cooking off.
Wow.
I don't know what the risk of another 500-pounder detonating was, and within, that whole scene was within minutes. There's just a skeleton of an airplane, and they got the guy out, and he was burned very badly. He came back to see us. They took him to the Philippines and patched him all up, and of course he was very appreciative.
I'm sure. Lots of acts of heroism that you witnessed. You mentioned one of your experiences for your Distinguished Flying Cross. You called it a DFC. What was the other one? Can you recall the incident?
It was pretty routine. We picked up on a plane of jars, but it was hostile, and we came back with bullet holes in us, and one particularly, we thought, with probably a 20-millimeter through one of the rotor blades, but the rotor blade is like a honeycomb carbon in the aft part of it, and so it went clean through, and it didn't bring us down. But we had some bullet creases up the side of the but you don't know, that's the funny part of it's so noisy, you don't know really when you're being shot at unless you can see muzzle flashes. And of course at night you can, but you usually don't know often that you've been shot at until you get home and see the bullet holes.
Wow.
Or some of the lights. The H-53 was heavily armored. We had 5/8 magnesium armor on all the critical components, and you sat in a magnesium armored seat, and but still you were vulnerable. One of our my gunners was the tail gunner, had an armor plate around his gun, used an armored vest, ballistic helmet. This poor kid got shot right in the face, and that was one of my more unfortunate duties. I was a summary court officer for this poor kid, and had to go through all of his stuff and organize it and decide what would be sent home and what was to be destroyed. And yeah, it was a very sad affair.
Did you lose many other crew members? That was you obviously lost that tail gunner.
Yeah, I mean, whole crew. One of the Holly Bell got shot down by a MiG. The whole crew went down. The MiG came out of North Viet, came out of Hanoi. We had airborne radars, so we could always spot the MiGs when they came out of Hanoi, and they seldom did. But this guy, and Holly was up there making a rescue, and a MiG came out. Just 5 minutes. He came out of Hanoi, and there were two helicopters, high and a low bird, and he shot the one in front. And of course, he went with a missile, went down, and this guy was back on the ground in Hanoi within 10 minutes. But we lost the whole crew that way. There were other hazards. Helicopter flying is hazardous. It's not as lethal, but we would air refuel it. You had this long probe. You would air refuel behind a C-130. They would send a drogue out, and you'd stick this probe in. And one of the guys, Cody Campbell, he came back, but I did a crappy reef. He came back, he got the thing in an unusual attitude and cut the hose off. He came with the rotor blades. It's really amazing he didn't, that it didn't throw blade. But
what's the flying time for that rescue helicopter before you'd have to refuel? What's on a full load?
I don't know. Let's see. Range, time. I bet we could, if you throttled it back, you could go 6, 7, 8 hours, I'll bet. But of course.
But your missions didn't last nearly that long. It was very in and out kind of thing.
No, we had the refueling capability if we needed it, but you seldom needed it.
Well, you got 5 air medals as well. Now, what kind of activity surrounded those awards?
Pretty much awarded for a number of combat missions you fly.
I see.
Nothing specific.
I see. So you were in a lot of combat during your career at that point in time, and were very fortunate to return. Was it an exhilarating experience to you? How did you come down from that experience? I'm sure you had an adrenaline surge there. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it is. Those are the two sides of it. War is fun. No, fun is not the right word to use. But the camaraderie, when you grow up watching John Wayne and Gary Cooper movies, and you get these magnificent machines that do all of these wonderful things, and you're doing, these extraordinary. It really is. It's awesome what you do. And it feels like, it's almost like a rite of passage, to
sure.
do. But then people get killed, within months, 2 of the guys in my pilot training class were dead. One was Bob Pankey. I don't know whatever happened to him. I heard he got hung up. He bailed out of his F-4, and then he got hung up in a car somewhere and didn't survive the bailout. And the other, Vic Smith, was they were looking for targets up in northern Laos, and the guy told he went I'm going to go down and troll for this little ground fire. Well, he did, and they shot him. Here was a 37 millimeter gun, and he was in an F-4. He told his backseater to bail out, who did get out alive. He was making a high-speed pass, so it was and he got broken up pretty badly, broken legs and arms, but he survived it. But Vic never, he didn't manage to get out.
Mm. Mm.
And
So how long were you in this combat station there? And how many months, years, or what was that tour of duty?
that was
Time
1 year.
1 year.
Uh-huh.
And that was the normal rotation, or did most people stay a year that went into that situation?
I was going back, one more thing. I mean,
Sure.
Bill McGeorge was my very best friend over there at the time in pilot training. These are all guys that went through pilot training, went for a year old. Now, he survived the war. He survived the Sante prison raid that when they went up to try to rescue the prisoners out of Hanoi. And then he went over to Germany on a training mission and threw a blade and died in a crash over there. But
Non-combat at all. Yeah.
survived all the hard stuff. And
Yeah. Mm.
yeah.
Happens occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
So after your year of combat duty, what was the next stage?
Came back to B-52s in Wright-Patterson, Ohio. And then I upgraded to aircraft commander and got my own crew. And we did the standing alert, airborne alert again, training missions. And,
So the B-52 was the last aircraft you served in.
right, but then I got reassigned back to Southeast Asia in B-52s. Now we're in 1971 and maybe early 72. This is when Nixon and Kissinger were negotiating. The peace process was ongoing, and Nixon said he was going to bomb them back to oblivion and so forth, and that's what he assigned us to do, I guess. And so then I went to Utapao in southern Thailand, which was still pretty close to the action. We could be airborne and drop bombs and be in Laos and be back Utapao in 5 hours or so. But then they started to use B-52s to go to North Vietnam. That is my claim to fame, and B-52s as being in the first wave that went into North Vietnam in B-52s. We went against Vinh, which is out on the coast, halfway up. And there was a big oil complex, railroad yard, and we came. I was down at Sadaheep in town and came home. So there were buses lined up in front of the hooches and knew something special was happening. And a note was on my door and my hooch and telling me to go to operations immediately. And there were 12 other crews, and they were briefing us on our first North mission in B-52s. And it, I can't say it was, we didn't lose any airplanes that time, but we sure got shot at a lot. It was a beautiful, clear night. And I don't know, the way it works is you do a timing triangle to get over the target at exactly the correct minute, because there are other airplanes trying to soften up the area. And we, as you're coming in off the timing triangle, you start to pick up the radars, the surveillance radars, so they know you're coming, you know. And then the initial point is the initial part of the bomb run. About there, well, you start to get, they start to get the azimuth as well as elevation. So now they know which direction you're coming from and how high you are.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And we knew there were SAMs, and they said we would probably get fired at on that one, but we didn't know how many. And then you can't, for the final 20 seconds or so of the bomb run, you can't maneuver. Technically, they said a B-52 at a light load can outturn a SAM. I don't know if that's true or not. But as we got in the IP, they could see him. The gunner in the D model was sitting back in the tail section, and he has a good view. And it's his. Well, first of all, we have an EW, electronics warfare officer, that he can read all the radar signals, and he can tell us when they have us locked on. So you know when it's when he yells lock on, something is imminent. But then when the gunner calls out liftoff, I mean, it's a heart stopper.
I can imagine.
And,
You know it's on its way to your aircraft.
And that's what a lot of people ask me, having experienced low level and high level, which is scarier. And I believe that being up there and feeling totally vulnerable, for
And
that.
can't maneuver.
No, it's on autopilot. Actually, for the last part of the bomb run, I give control of the aircraft to the navigator. He has a little joystick down there that he can do really precise maneuvers on. And so you're sitting there for 20 seconds, and they come up slowly. You can see them coming up, and they'll go through the cloud cover sometimes, and they go by, and they detonate overhead, but it is a heart stopper to sit there, for 20 seconds.
And here they come, and that's what they're using primarily as a target, as a weapon.
Oh, yeah.
SAMs.
Uh-huh.
And those are radar detected. Do you know how they were operating?
They have once they get the azimuth, they know which direction you're coming. Then they have your altitude, and they have an uplink, they call it, to the missile. So there are 3 radars that are functioning. And if we can jam any one of those, we can probably stop, which is what we were doing,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But they learned early on they would come up on one frequency, and our EW would jam it, and then they would launch the missile, and then they would shut down the radar, and the missile's in the air, and it was heading our direction, and the EW didn't. Then they would quickly come up on another frequency and guide it, and before the EW had a chance to block that frequency.
Ah, okay.
And it was pretty effective. They started to hit us that way. And then we learned other countermeasures, and we had wild weasels, they called them, that would home on their radars, but it was only partially effective. And it was a dangerous game.
So a bomb run, actually releasing the weapons and the bombs, was 20 seconds, did you say?
No, the bomb run would maybe last 20 to 30 seconds from the initial point to bomb release. You had to have a certain straight and level path to be accurate. The actual bomb release would, depending on how densely you wanted it, depending on the type of ordnance, would maybe take only 10 or 15 seconds. 10, I bet even less than that. 5 to 8 seconds. It was all, if everything was functioning normally, it was automatic. You set up the equipment. I would give control to the radar navigator to get us precisely on the target, and he would have his radar set up to start the bomb release automatically. And I had a yellow light that would blink, 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 and you'd hear the airplane shudder. Because the airplane did become, because you dropped off about 100,000 pounds of ordnance.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as all the ordnance was away, I would take back control, do a hard turn.
Get out of the area.
Very quickly.
Full throttle. How many typical, and probably not a very good question, but is there a typical number of aircraft in a bomb run like that, or it varies from target to target, I assume?
At least 3.
Mm-hmm.
And that first run on Vin, we had 12. You'd go in groups of 3. You would, we call it a DASC formation. And depending on what type of ordnance, you could spread it out. And we could sow wide swath, long ways with 15 airplanes.
Ooh, wow.
Or 12. But normally it would be a 3 airplane group.
And those runs would normally last from 3 to 5 hours total.
About.
Yeah.
You would, early on, the targets were along the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos and in Cambodia, and until early '72 we started to go north, and they did. They lost 6 B-52s in one day on out of a force of I don't know how many. It was it was a real bad day for.
Big loss, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So after we had that tour of duty back in Southeast Asia with the B-52, what was the next thing? How did your service continue?
It was, my time was just about up. I came back in, January. No, it was later than that. See, I flew this airplane on several missions. It sits over here in Mobile now.
Really?
Yeah. And one of them was on my brother's birthday in January 31st,
My goodness.
1972. I always remind him of that when we go over there. And so I only had 2 months or so. I came back to Wright-Patterson and I was discharged in July.
So you had a 6-year tour of duty? Or
Seven, actually.
Seven,
Mhm.
okay. And you left the service as a colonel or?
Captain.
Captain,
Uh-huh.
okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Captain. Mhm.
Well, we'll wrap this up if you don't mind. And what did you take away from the service? Truly a patriot and a wonderful service to our country. What did you take away? Would you do it all over again?
You bet.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, I say that I would do it all over again at that age. I don't know whether I'd do it again
Sure.
at this age. You
Yeah.
know, you have to qualify that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, it's a wonderful experience. It's sad and it's
You
tragic.
get plenty of support, proper equipment, great training.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Second to none.
Yeah, a real education. It's really expands, broadens you so much. We never would have had all of. I think it made me. That's why I still like to travel around the world. I think.
Not intimidated by much.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to put it. It does take.
You become a braver person and a more proactive person. Military training is just excellent for a number of reasons.
Yes, it is. Yeah, you know that.
We need the draft back. What's your opinion of that?
I don't know. It seems to be working okay. I'm settled for what's happening now.
Well, is there anything else you want to add to this visit, Jim?
I think you've covered it all. I appreciate that.
Well, we certainly appreciate your time today and adding to the value of this program. And thank you for your service.
No, you're very welcome. It's nice to be able to tell the story and the people that are interested,
Absolutely. Well, good day and good luck, and I hope you catch some fish soon or find a good place to go.
I'll do my best.
All right, thank you. All right, great.
Thank you, folks.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, what's the next trip for you? You got something planned soon?
Might be Vietnam, as a matter of fact.
Is that right?
Might be.
You served?
I've been back to Thailand 3 times.
Yeah.
But never to Vietnam. I mean, never. I was there during the war, but
Yeah.
I haven't been back. As
I've
a
known several
civilian.
Vietnam veterans that have gone back and they really enjoyed it.
I know exactly where we landed out there in a plane in charge. I want to go back to Laos. You can get to Laos fairly easily now. I'd like to go back and stand on that ground.
I hope you get to. I really hope you get to.
Yeah.
Wonderful service.
Well,
and thank you for sharing your story.
Okay,
with
no,
us.
thank
That was
you.
awesome.